Hi, welcome to another video blog edition of the Dreizin Report. Thanks for watching. Now, I want to get into what's going on in the Donbass because this is the most important sector of the Ukraine right now, and from the military perspective. And there's something big that's happening, and what's happening is that the Ukrainian forces are finally buckling. They're finally buckling. They're finally starting to come apart slowly but surely, because what the Russians have been doing day after day, week after week, month after month, is they've essentially been they've got them like a walnut and a nutcracker, and the Russians just push harder and harder and harder, and they never stop. And despite all the brave information warfare and hype that the Ukrainians put out, the fact is eventually they were gonna buckle under the pressure, and they were gonna give, and they're giving now. And what we're seeing is basically a couple of very big developments. There's something that's in roughly north of the major industrial town of Gorlovka, which itself is about somewhere north or northwest of Donetsk. There was something called the Svetlodarskaya Duga, which is the Svetlodarsk salient, or the Svetlodarsk bulge. It was a bulge into the Donetsk defense lines that basically had existed almost since the beginning of the Donbass standoff in 2015 or maybe even 2014. The Donetsk forces had tried to reduce it somewhat in 2016. I don't think they were very successful. And basically, they could never really, it was just this thorn in their side. And finally, the Russian and Donetsk joint forces have liquidated that salient. So the Svetlodarskaya Duga no longer exists. The Ukrainians actually saw that they were being surrounded, that the Russian and Donetsk forces were coming in roughly from the north-central portion of that bulge, and were going to actually come in and surround the city of Svetlodarsk from the north, from the northeast. And the Ukrainians said, to hell with it, we are evacuating. Not a Azov, Mariupol type evacuation where they're all prisoners and they say it's an evacuation, but a real evacuation. They basically retreated and pulled out of Svetlodarsk almost without any kind of a fight at all. The city is essentially left intact, which is great for the residents. Town, I should say. It's not really a city. It's a town about maybe 10 or 20,000 people, but it was very strategic. And so that bulge is now liquidated. Now further north in Lugansk, in northern Lugansk, after the taking of Popasna by Russian forces, what happened was that was a really strategic town. It was not a large city, but it was large enough. But it was a very strategic, because, as I covered in previous videos, Popasna was really the key to the southern defense. It was essentially a keystone or a cornerstone to the southern defense of the entire salient, the Ukrainian salient, the remaining Ukrainian territory that extends into North Lugansk and terminates at the east with Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. And that salient is now at serious risk of being cut off. The Russian and the Lugansk forces have advanced very quickly west and north of Popasna, especially west, but also north. They have advanced roughly 10 kilometers north and about 15 kilometers west, probably taken, about 150 square kilometers north and west of Popasna just in the last roughly week or so, which is a pretty good rate of advance for this area. What they're doing now is they are threatening the road, the town of Solidar, which lies on the real only highway type road into Lysychansk, without which the Ukrainians cannot be resupplied in, and they cannot have an organized evacuation out. There is now video footage of that road being shelled, at least in terms of smoke plumes coming up and a little bit of craters and this and that. So there's certainly some video of that road now under Russian fire control. So that's very, very bad for the Ukrainians. And on top of that, Russian forces coming from the north, have taken roughly half of the town of Krasny Liman, which was Krasny being red. It was subsequently renamed by the Ukrainians to just Liman because of their decommunization drive. But I'm going to call it by what the locals call it. Anyway, Krasny Liman. It was literally weeks, probably a month of fighting by Russia just to get to the outskirts of that city, and they finally cracked that nut, and they've taken about half of the town. By very credible reports, there are several hundred Ukrainian soldiers that have surrendered in Krasny Liman now, which is probably, if it sounds like it's the single biggest act of surrender so far outside of Mariupol. So they're starting to buckle, they're starting to come apart, and like, you can obviously see, why Secretary of Defense of the United States Lloyd Austin called Secretary of Defense Shoigu of Russia about something like a week or two ago, asking for a ceasefire. Yeah, they want a ceasefire. They know that they're losing. The intelligence available to the U.S. Army and the U.S. Department of Defense is actually far, far better than any of the hype that you're hearing, on in the MSM. They know the score. They know the score. They're not relying on Twitter for their intelligence. They know what's going on, and but no, they're not going to get a ceasefire. Ukraine's going to be taken apart. Once the North Lugansk salient is closed off, you're going to have at least 9,000, perhaps more, Ukrainian troops that are completely cut off in the vicinity of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. After that, it just gets worse and worse and worse. Now, I want to talk about why did it take so long, and why is things moving faster now? Why are things snowballing now? So I want to talk about two things. I want to talk about the nature of the Ukrainian defense in the Donbass, and I want to talk then about psychology. Okay, the nature of the Ukrainian defense in the Donbass was what the Russians call эшелонированная оборона, or глубоко эшелонированная оборона, which means defense in depth, right? And what they had was, it was essentially, you have something called a defense line, and it may exist on a map. It's not something that you can necessarily see from the sky, right? But it's something conceptual. And basically, a defense line is a continuous linkage or chain of defensive positions that involve interlocking fields of fire, mutual coverage, and coverage of the areas between the positions, such that an attacker trying to get between the positions would be subjected to fire from multiple sides, possibly also fire from artillery that has that specific access route sighted in advance. Okay, so that is a defense line. You can have it can be not necessarily one type of position, right? You can have a mix of trenches. You can have homes or schools or other buildings that are sturdy enough, that have been identified as set up as, anti-tank guided missile positions, or mortar positions. You can have, there can be pillboxes and various earthworks and caponniers to provide cover for vehicles, kind of semi underground, and then they pull out at, when they're needed. You have these what do you call them? Emplacements that can be, partially made of soil, partially made of wood. You have cement lined emplacements as well. So there's a lot of different types of positions that can go into a defense line, and in fact, you don't even need any pre-built emplacements. As long as you know where the line is, you can essentially identify a series of above ground structures and say that this is the line, and we are every one of these structures has a certain weapon firing out of it that reinforces that covers a certain area, and you have interlocking fields of fire, and then you have also coverage where they reinforce each other from the sides, and also ideally you have ideally for the defender, again, you have pre-sighted artillery or mortars where basically you know that if there's someone coming down this road at you, you just put a bomb in this mortar to launch it, and it will come exactly down, on that road where you want it. So that's called pre-sighting. So this is a defensive line. And what a defense in depth means is that you have multiple defense lines, right? And it's not pleasant coming at this because you don't know, as the attacker, you don't know exactly where these positions are. You don't necessarily know where the next line is, how far apart the lines are, and it can just be a very brutal thing. And you're not going to obviously cover it in one day, of course, but well, unless the defenders just simply evacuate. But it can be a very, very complex thing when you have multiple defensive lines that are reinforcing each other, in fact. But what happens is ultimately, and these defensive lines, they can be thrown up within a relatively short time if they don't involve emplacements in terms of earthworks and trenches and so forth. The problem is, when you've got a rapid offensive, you've got an enemy that is taking heavy casualties from artillery, starting to crack, and they pull back. The defense in depth is not infinite. It's not infinite. So you pull back to one line, you have one line, it falls, you pull back to another line, you pull back to, eventually you get to the point where you don't have any more preset lines, right? So then you have to throw them up kind of an ad hoc, shucks, we're going to put up a line here, and it's not very high quality, it's not very well thought out. There may be gaps, you may not have enough personnel to provide coverage, and of all approaches, and then eventually the whole thing, you fall back far enough and the whole thing falls apart, and then the attacker is just up in your guts. Okay, and so again, the defense in depth is not infinite, and what we're seeing now north and west of Popasna is we are seeing that the Russians have basically got up into the guts from the southern end of the Severodonetsk-Lysychansk bulge. And that's why they were able to advance so fast. That's why they took something like roughly 150 square kilometers in less than a week. I mean, a few days. Maybe it's a very fast rate of advance for this sector. But evidently, what's happening is Popasna was sort of there were a bunch of lines around Popasna, and that was kind of the last big place where they really put up an organized stand. And when they pulled out of that, partly they were liquidated, but when they pulled out of Popasna, that was it. They've reached the limit of their defense in depth, right? And then the enemy's in their guts. And, what makes it difficult, of course, is they still have artillery. The Ukrainians still have artillery that can slow the Russian advance. There was a Russian supply column of munitions carrying, I believe, artillery munitions, but some kind of munitions. There was a supply column that was simply largely annihilated. They hit about 7 munitions trucks with Ukrainian artillery in the area of Kamushavacha, about 10 or 12 kilometers north of Popasna, and just wiped them out. So artillery is still a threat, but in terms of fixed ground positions, it's really a mess right now. And so the Russians, they've been planning for this, and they keep bringing up reserves, and you've seen the Terminators, and they got tanks, and they got other stuff, and they have no shortage of reserves. Now apparently they're bringing back the Rosgvardia, which is the Russian National Guard, so to speak, and they had really taken a break from the war since basically the end of March, beginning of April. Now they're kind of rested. They're coming back, well documented, and so the Ukrainians eventually you crack that nut, and they keep falling back, and eventually they have no more. They're out of depth. Even though they still have territory. They're out of defensive depth, right? Defense in depth, and so that's where they are now. That's where they're not on all sectors, but in North Lugansk, that's where they are, and also probably in the area of Svetlodarsk, because I don't know what's northwest of Svetlodarsk. I don't know what kind of defenses they have there. Maybe nothing. So we'll see. We'll see now that that town has fallen to the Russians. So The next thing is psychology. So again, we're talking about why are things snowballing so fast? Well, there's psychology. So there was some geniuses, that wrote in the Wall Street Journal when the Azov jerks were surrendering, and they said, uh, this really makes no difference because, okay, Mariupol, now the Russians have officially taken Mariupol, but it makes no difference because Mariupol was far behind, Russian lines, and it was kind of just, being swallowed up, and the Russians were already far north of it, and it makes no difference at all because it's, the front was nowhere near there, right? Wrong. I've called it out on my blog, and it's, it's still wrong, and it's even more wrong every day because once the Ukrainians understand, and as I covered in my blog, once they understand that there's no help coming, Uncle Sam's not coming, Zelensky's not coming, the cavalry's not coming. If no one came to save the Azov, which are these really special boys that were considered to be like the Ukrainian elite, and everyone wanted to save them, and no one did. Okay, not the Pope, not Eurovision voters, nobody came. Once they realize, oh, nobody saved the Azov, nobody's going to save us, right? That's when they start to retreat. That's when they start to surrender, and I believe that's what we're starting to see now. So the problem is, it's always hard to surrender. People don't understand. You first of all, you're with your platoon, your company, whatever, your squad. Let's say you want to wander off and surrender. You can't do it. Your own people will arrest you or maybe shoot you in the back. You can't just do it. Also, there may be, you may say, oh, I'm gonna walk. I'm gonna walk down this field. I think the Russians are somewhere down there. I'm gonna walk towards them. Okay, well, you step on a mine and you're dead, right? Or the Russians see you and they don't realize you're surrendering and they shoot you, or some drone takes you out or something, right? So it's actually, in principle, very dangerous to surrender when you're on open territory. I mean, if you're inside a house, you can just wave a white flag out the window, but if you're just on open territory, you don't know where exactly the enemy is, where to walk. It's not easy to just surrender, right? And so you might get killed by the enemy while you're trying to surrender. While you're going to surrender, you might get killed by your own people or detained at a minimum. And so you have danger from both sides as someone that's looking to surrender. And but at some point you realize, whoa, I'm gonna die anyway, right? I mean, no one is coming to save me. The Russians are coming. They're coming from this direction. They're coming from this direction. They're coming from this direction. They're coming from this direction, and we're gonna be surrounded, and we're gonna be wasted, just like the guys in Mariupol. And either I surrender or I die. And the longer I wait, the greater the chances that I die, right? So at that point, what you do is, well, if you can, that changes your thinking, right? You're gonna try to overcome the risk and say, I'm gonna surrender, come hell or high water, whatever happens, because I'm a dead man anyway. Or just as likely or more likely, you're gonna retreat. You're more likely to retreat, right? And because you don't want to be in the position where you're going to have to be given that choice of, well, surrender or die, right? If that's your choice, that's not a nice choice, because obviously if you're surrounded, no one's coming to save you at this point, right? We know that the initiative is very strongly with the Russians. We know that the Azov gave up and no one came to save them. So really, again, it makes you think, well, if I stay here, there's no help coming, right? And so that raises the chance that units will retreat. It also raises the chance of, if they are encircled, then they will be much more likely to surrender, because the chances of them dying now are much greater. So it changes the thinking, because typically when guys they have a way out, they can say, well, if worst comes to worst, I can just go this way, I can go this way, and you'll stay and fight. No one wants to die, right? You'll stay and fight for as long as it is tenable. Your position is tenable. Once it gets untenable, then it becomes, well, untenable, right? Do I want to die for my country, or do I want to be a hero? No. If no one's coming to save me, if I'm just cannon fodder, then I'm gonna get the hell out of here. I'm gonna retreat. And what we're seeing is a lot of retreating. What we're seeing is a lot of retreating. A month ago, 2 months ago, the Ukrainians in Svetlodarsk, they were standing and fighting. A week ago, they were standing and fighting. 2 days ago, they were standing and fighting as of when I'm talking. And now they just disappeared. They just evacuated because, they realize it's hopeless. And when you get to a situation of it's hopeless, then it's like, what is my sacrifice worth? What? And then everybody is having that same thought, right? Everybody is having that same thought. And then the entire army starts to degrade and starts to crumble. So that's sort of the beginning of what we're seeing now. No, the war is not going to end tomorrow, but we're already seeing the beginning of the end, I would say, because there's a change in the psychology, and the Ukrainians are running out of depth. Now, what's very interesting is that the authorities in Dnipro, which is the city formerly known as, in Russian, Dnipropetrovsk, but anyone now in Ukrainian, Dnipro, it's one of the largest cities right on the Dnieper River. It's in east central Ukraine. The authorities there are now creating defense in depth of their own. They've been instructed to create 4 defensive lines around the city, and the city is still like, I don't know, at least 100 kilometers from the nearest Russian. I mean, at least 100 kilometers from the nearest Russian. And there's no imminent risk, but they're seeing the writing on the wall. They're seeing the writing on the wall, and so is Lloyd Austin. Otherwise, he wouldn't be calling Shoigu for a ceasefire. So at some point, the MSM here in the States and in Britain and elsewhere, and the all these expert retired generals on TV that don't know anything about this kind of war, really, they're gonna have to wake up. They're gonna have to, whoa, what's going on here? Like, the Ukrainians are crumbling and collapsing, and we thought that only Russia can crumble and collapse, and now so they're gonna have to do a 180, and it's going to be a lot of cognitive dissonance. And, as I predicted in my mailing list before I even had my blog, although some of this may be on my blog, kind of as archives, it's going to be another Afghanistan situation where everyone's thinking, oh, it's going great, we're nation building, and then boom, it just collapses. And, that's what's going to happen with Ukraine. I've been telling people for months, even before the war, and, it's just going to be much faster. It's going to be a much faster version of Afghanistan, and Afghanistan with nuclear power plants. So, yeah, good prospects. All right, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoy my closing music, which is Danse des Chevaliers, Dance of the Knights, from Prokofiev's Romeo and Juliet ballet. Finally, if you didn't know, now you know. Thank you so much.